Play different.
This ain't your grandma's bridge club, you punks. This is the US Marine Corps.
Greetings, fellow Mac addicts. In this video, we're looking at Damage Incorporated, which was among the first squad-based shooters. It was released in 1997, a year before Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six defined the genre and took the world by storm. Or should I say, took the world by Red Storm, because Red Storm Entertainment made the game. Ha 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 ha. Put simply, Damage Incorporated is a mix between the later Rainbow Six and the earlier id Software game Doom, although it would be more accurate to call it Rainbow Six crossed with Marathon 2 because it uses the Marathon 2 engine. Developed by Paranoid Productions, it was designed by Richard Rouse III, who I think is one of the most interesting people in mainstream game development, and this game is an example of why, as it's not just about running around killing bad guys, but it also explores the psychological toll military combat has on soldiers. Rouse is perhaps most well known for the Suffering series, and as of recording, is about to release a new game called The Church in the Darkness. I'll link to more information below, but for now, let's take a look at Damage Incorporated. Although it wasn't the first one to be released, a squad-based first-person shooter was still an innovative and ambitious idea in 1997. It all came about with the popularity of the real-time strategy game Command & Conquer. The publisher of Damage Incorporated, Microsoft, was keen to have something with a military setting, which combined a first-person shooter with the feel of commanding troops in Command & Conquer. Rouse liked that idea too, so they were a natural fit, though he doesn't think he made the game they were expecting, especially in terms of the story, but more on that later. Coincidentally, Microsoft also wanted to license Bungie's Marathon 2 engine, and Rouse already had an in with that crew as he was friends with folks at the company. In fact, Rouse's last game, Odyssey, The Legend of Nemesis, started as a Bungie game before he took it over early in development. So the game, for the most part, works like this. It starts by giving you a mission briefing which details what and or who you are about to face. These are typically fictional American terrorist groups, although most are based on real organizations. The first group you face, for example, is heavily based on the Ku Klux Klan. The briefings can go into quite a lot of detail, presenting a history of the terror group and highlighting places of interest on the map. Most importantly, they tell you what needs to be done to complete the mission, and objectives can be quite varied. Sometimes you just need to wipe out all enemy forces, and other times you may be saving hostages or escorting an expert to defuse a bomb. You may also be sent out to find hidden weapon caches or important documents. And although in many cases the objectives really just boil down to getting from point A to point B, the level design makes you feel like you're doing different things. When you're ready, the game drops you in a level, and you run around shooting and exploring in a very 90s fashion. The levels aren't as straightforward as something like Doom, however, as although the objectives tend to not be too complex, levels are often quite non-linear, and require a good amount of exploration and checking the map to figure out where you need to go. Paying attention to the briefing also helps, especially since some missions spread over more than one level. In this way, the level design feels very similar to Marathon 2, which shouldn't be a surprise considering the game's heritage. And while I understand not everyone likes this style of design, especially since sometimes people can get lost for quite a long time in a level, it is very much my jam, and I feel it suits the setting of the game and the mechanics quite well. There are also 8 weapons to choose from, such as pistols, shotguns, flamethrowers, and rocket launchers. Some weapons even have multiple ammo types. For example, the shotgun has standard buckshot, in addition to phosphorus and even acid rounds. Just in case you're feeling especially sadistic, some ammo works better against different enemies as well. But the biggest difference between this and other shooters at the time was that you could have up to 4 squad mates at your command. Thankfully, commanding them was kept quite simple. You press a number to select an order, and then another number to assign it to one or more soldiers. The orders available include following someone, exploring a direction, or moving to a specific point. Which gives me the opportunity to mention that you can set waypoints on the map. There are also macro commands assigned to the function keys for when you need to give quick commands in the heat of battle. It's also possible to play in a more traditional real-time strategy manner by using the map screen. This is possible because under certain circumstances, the location of enemies are revealed on the map, and all you have to do is select a soldier and then click where you want them to go. Using the map in this way can be extremely useful, especially when you want to flank enemies. But obviously, it can be a bit cumbersome during battles, and although sometimes you'll have a nice big chunk of the map revealed at the start of a mission, that's not always the case, and you'll need to do some exploring before you can issue map commands. Coming up with a usable interface was the hardest part of design for Rouse, but from a programming standpoint, the biggest challenge was writing the AI, as they took a system that was a part of Marathon 2 and made it do things it was never designed to do. For those of you who have not played Marathon 2, occasionally AI companions would drop in and attack enemies by your side, and it's this simple system on which Paranoid Productions built their own upon. Rouse said that when commanding teammates, the player expects them to do exactly what they want immediately, and to never, ever get stuck. A lot of development time was spent making sure that didn't happen, and Rouse says that right up until release, those were some of the biggest bugs he was fixing. Replaying recently, I was quite surprised at how well it holds up. Now, it's far from perfect, and indeed, on occasion, squad mates did get stuck. Additionally, especially when you're still new to the game, they sometimes don't do what you expect them to. They also have a bad habit of shooting you in the back if you get between them and an enemy. So yes, you do have to be patient at times, and occasionally they can be a bit frustrating, but once you learn how to use them and manipulate their AI behavior to your desires, it won't be long before you're storming through levels with your squaddies, as I affectionately call them. Here are a few tips. First of all, do not have them follow behind you if you haven't already cleared the area, because when you encounter enemies and move around in a firefight, there is a very good chance your so-called buddies will shoot you in the back if you get between them and the enemy. Instead, it's best to send them out in different directions as you engage a new area and use them to flank or flush out enemies. In fact, in general, staying together in a clump is a bad idea, as that just makes a bigger target and can lead to chaos in tight spaces. And I really do recommend learning how to best use your men, as while it is possible to beat the game on your own, at least on the normal and lower difficulties, it's much easier, and not to mention much more satisfying, storming through the level with your squaddies. Thankfully, there are also some very gracious design decisions to ease the limitations of the AI. For example, your crew never gets equipped with rocket launchers. They explain this away in the story with some nonsense, but really, it's just because the AI will constantly blow themselves up. Even more gracious is that when you face enemies equipped with rocket launchers, they prioritize targeting you over your troops, which is much appreciated because your squad wouldn't last 30 seconds otherwise. But the squad members aren't just faceless AIs. Oh no, each had their own distinct personalities. Here are some examples. There is Vidiot, an avid gamer who quotes from games popular at the time, and who has trouble distinguishing reality from fiction. There is also Preacher, a former minister who turned to the military as he believes it is what God wanted. Then there's Metal, a former drug addict who had a troubled childhood and found stability in the Marines. He also has a habit of quoting lines from heavy metal songs during missions. There are also 8 more men you can choose from, each with their own personality. They will even occasionally chime in with their thoughts on the current mission. Rouse developed the squad mates into characters because he wanted to tell their stories, even though they aren't the main plot per se. The primary story in a game like this, he says, is much less important than the characters you are spending time with. And as a game writer, he wanted what you spent the most time with to be as narratively interesting as possible. I would also like to take a moment to applaud the game for having a racially diverse team to choose from, although naming the Japanese soldier Banzai is a little bit questionable, even if his profile does explain that it's part of his dark sense of humour. To further cement the idea of each squad member being an individual, if one dies, there is no way to bring them back, other than restoring a previous saved game of course. Rouse also liked the idea of people playing more carefully with their troops as a result of knowing that if they lost one, they lost them for good. Your commander will even say a few words about fallen soldiers at the end of a mission, and there is a little in memoriam service once the game is completed. And in case you were wondering, yes, this does mean that it's possible to be short men by the end of the game if too many get killed. Part of me thinks the game would be better with limited saving to really hammer home that people can die in battle. But on the other hand, I'm really glad I could save scum my way through the game when I needed to. Some squaddies are also more proficient than others in combat, but they are all capable, so I found myself taking the people with me who I enjoy spending time with the most. But there is a reason why one may want to have a good think before taking just anyone on a mission, as not only do the characters have their own personalities and pasts, they can also have drastically different mental health, and sometimes, depending on the surrounding environment, PTSD or other psychological issues can be triggered, dramatically altering the behaviour of the character in the mission, and there is a risk that they will jeopardize the entire thing, or at the very least, their own lives. I remember the first time this happened when I was playing. I became incredibly confused and shocked, not sure what had just happened. Needless to say, it left quite an impression on me, and I was very impressed that a game, especially one from the mid-90s, explored the mental trauma soldiers can have. That said, the portrayal was often over the top. Rouse said that this was to match with the comic book, somewhat campy tone of the game, which was more of a necessity of the technology they were working with, which dictated the art style and such. Damage Incorporated was far from a realistic military sim, and he didn't want to pretend it was. Still, it did try to be respectful. Rouse also used it to explore the idea that in life and death situations, you never know how you're going to react unless you're there yourself. I will discuss in more detail how all this affects the actual play of the game in the spoilers section. There is also a slowly unraveling main story that the game follows. At the start, the player doesn't know the true purpose and nature of their task force, only that it has to be a secret as it's illegally operating on US soil, taking out what are considered to be local threats to the country. Eventually more is revealed, and you start to notice connections between missions, such as enemies wearing the same distinct uniforms appearing among the different groups you face. And by the end, everything is tied together. I asked Rouse if the government running secret operations and concealing information from soldiers was commentary. He told me it's just what he thinks really goes on, though not exactly how the game portrays it, of course. To me, there also seem to be themes of being abandoned by your country and or government, especially after serving it, such as in the military, or that the country is becoming something you can no longer believe in, with many of the groups you face trying to quote-unquote take their country back. This felt especially true with the ending, which I'll discuss in more detail in the spoiler section. I asked Rouse if this was his intent, and he told me that in general, he prefers to just think of exploring a certain subject, and whatever themes emerged out of that are what they are. But he added that he hadn't connected the dots in the way that I did, and thinks that I may well be right. Of course, someone else playing the game may get something completely different from it. In regards to the actual fringe groups that you fight, it was rooted in research into the domestic, militant anti-government groups that were gathering storm in the mid-1990s. Rouse spent a lot of time looking into the groups that formed after the events at Ruby Ridge, the tragedy at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, and the motives behind Timothy McVeigh's bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City. Again, the game was over the top with how it portrayed these things in its world, but Rouse still tried to pull from real-world sources as much as possible. As I've mentioned, I would like to discuss in more detail some of the things Damage Incorporated explores in a spoiler section, just in case some of you would like to play the game for yourself. And I do recommend it. The game is rough around the edges, and can sometimes require a bit of patience, and the game may be simply too dated for some people, but I thoroughly enjoyed replaying it for this video. And that is Damage Incorporated, a game that was not only ambitious and innovative with its game design, but also with its narrative, and its exploration of the psychological toll military combat can have on a person. Thank you for watching.
Warning: the remainder of this video contains spoilers.
As I mentioned earlier, some squad members have psychological issues that can impact missions. Carnage, for example, is a hardcore patriot. For the most part, this makes him a loyal and an aggressive soldier. But if you take him on a mission where you fight a group who he sees as fellow patriots, he will turn on Damage Incorporated, and you have to take him out before he takes you out. Another member, Preacher, is an extremely religious person, quoting the Bible as he mows down enemies in the name of God. But if you take him on a mission against a religious cult, he'll go mad with rage and go quote-unquote berserk, running blindly through the level, shooting everyone he sees, likely resulting in his own death or shooting you by accident. Another example was Metal, who has some childhood trauma. As a result, if you take him on too many missions, he'll get shell-shocked and refuse to take orders, and ramble about noises that won't stop tormenting him. Another interesting touch is how the other squad members respond to these breakdowns. For example, when someone gets shell-shocked, some will say that we need to go help them, while others will berate them for not being able to quote-unquote hack it, further developing each squad member into an individual. Another interesting thing I want to talk about is the rules of engagement. Before most missions, the game tells you not to fire until you are fired upon. Most players will ignore that, of course, and shoot first and ask questions later. But there is actually one level where the enemies will not attack you, and you can go about and complete the mission without their interference. Although the chewing out you get if you do open fire is kinda hilarious. Rouse included this mission because he thinks players can get too used to just shooting everything that moves. And not only is that unrealistic, it can also make the game boring. He thinks it's better to see a target and have to assess if you should shoot them or not. He acknowledges it can be comforting to play a game where no thinking is required, but those games aren't as interesting for him to work on. Finally, there is the ending, which has stuck with me to this day. It consists of a long recorded rant by the game's villain, Jeremiah. The thing is, despite him committing horrendous acts that I feel are unforgivable, I found myself agreeing with many of his observations about society, which left me a bit confused. He ended up coming off as a very broken man who had a lot of anger towards those he felt broke him. I asked Rouse if this was the reaction he wanted, and he told me that with all his villains, he tries to make them heroes in their own minds, or make clear the thing that made them like they are. They are still bad people who do bad things, but there are reasons at least. And if the reasons are good, he hopes they make you question your assumptions. Because usually, the player has been seeing this central adversary throughout the game, and then when they finally meet them, they turn out to be something other than what they expected. And in the case of Jeremiah, they needed someone who had lost it so much that they would carry out attacks against their own country, which is unthinkable for most people in the military. So what got him there? The long rambling speech at the end gives you some idea, but it still leaves it open enough for interpretation. It's for this reason that I will end this video with the game's ending in its entirety. Thank you for watching.
Woohoo! You sure pulled it off and sent Jeremiah to where all deserter scum belong. You got a lot to be proud of, soldier, you and your men. I hate to be grandiose, but I think we may have single-handedly saved our country from the self-destruction Jeremiah had planned. But as long as groups like the White Paladins and the Seekers of Desu still exist, and there are lunatics to arm them, I don't know how safe our country can ever be. I told you I'd let you hear some of Jeremiah's rantings we received over the radio. Maybe it'll give you some kind of idea what drove him, but I doubt it. Gives delusional a whole new meaning, really.
When a prodigal son returns, is it the greeting I got he wants? When he's been to the other side of the inferno, does he want to be frozen instead? And who's responsible for the ice, for the chill that comes with the ice, for the pain that is insurmountable? Is it the people, the places, the things? I don't know, but I do know what must happen. What must happen? What of the bully pulpit? The same one that sends us adrift, does nothing for our return, does nothing for our pain, feels it, but denies that it exists. Just whose chemicals were they? Just whose pain is it? I've seen a lot. I've been around, but nothing is worse than the colonies. No. What could be worse? Where no one wants anyone who isn't themselves? Where no one wants to spend more than 30 seconds figuring anything out. Where the country needs to get rocked and cold-cocked to feel it's alive. Where men say she was asking for it. Where spilling coffee makes you a millionaire. Where a man is tried for criticizing the ridiculous because he's dangerous? Don't cry fire, just doing my job here, just doing my job. But someone's got to throw the switch. But it's the sharks that win in the end, yes they do. Where one black man kills one white woman, and the throbbing horde gets all upset. But one black man kills 10 other black men, and everyone sleeps tight. Where the government determines the positions we can use, and who we can use them with. Don't ask, don't tell, that's not censorship, that's the marketplace. The greatest healthcare system in the world. Adam Smith's a great success, isn't he? there's gotta be 10 people who love them, doesn't there? And 10 people's enough, if they lust him enough. That's when I reach for my M16. It has all the answers. I knew the Marines would be back for me someday. They never forget their dead, do they? No, no. But you can't save the colonies, no. They'll fall on their own, without my friendly persuasion. So you found my Italian comrades. Then why don't you come join me, once upon a time in the West? Unless a few hundred slaughtered isn't enough for you, but I can see the murder in your eyes. Hard heart indeed. Be seeing you.